All righty. Hey guys, welcome, 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 welcome. We are glad you're here. There's a lot going on in our world right now and in our country right now. We want to acknowledge that and are glad that whether you're joining us live or at some point in the future, we want to extend that welcome for you to be part of this conversation, and one that we trust will be a helpful conversation to the many different issues that are facing church leaders today. Our context here, this is called the Backstage webinar. It's a weekly webinar that we bring in a variety of different guests and friends among a team of us on a strategy team who are working together as a project of resilientchurchleadership.com. So if you haven't been over there, and you're just hearing about this through somebody who liked this or shared on their Facebook, welcome. Do recommend that you head over to resilientchurchleadership.com and make sure you register to be on these webinars on a weekly basis. We'd love to stay in touch. Our goal with this whole project is to offer weekly moments for you, for team members, for anyone who's involved in serving others in this really important hour in our world, for you to focus oddly maybe on your own soul and the thought of your soul care, your team's soul care, with the goal of being able to be resilient in the midst of our ministry, which has certainly been a challenge at all times, but particularly in this past year. So my name is Mindy Calaguire. I work with an organization in Boulder, Colorado. That's where I am today. Called Glue, and then I also work with Soul Care, which is soulcare.com, something I've been working with for a number of years, really passionate about the intersection of spiritual formation and leadership. And today we are joined by an incredible woman leader who have just been delighted to be getting to know more, Dr. Margaret Diddams, who is the editor of the Christian Scholars Review. Some of you may be familiar with her work there. Also the former president for Wheaton, or provost, sorry, got the wrong title. I got the PR in there. I knew that. I am not confused by that, but I said the wrong word. So she is the former provost for Wheaton College, moving now into her work as doing consulting with different leadership organizations, really expanding her influence into the kinds of worlds that you guys live in. With a new practice, a new consultancy called the Diddams Group. And so you can find her on LinkedIn and a variety of other places. So we're really excited that you're here, Margaret. Welcome.
Hi, Mindy. It's so good to be back again. Those of you who were with us last month, I had this wonderful conversation with Eddie about lament and leadership. And Eddie was kind enough to say, we're not done with the conversation. And then Eddie bagged on us this week. So I get to talk with you.
I know, lucky me. And I actually wasn't able to be on that call, but in our conversations leading up to right now, I just could not be more excited, guys, for what you're about to dive into. It's hard to feel excited about a topic called lament, but nothing could feel more accurate for the moment we're in a church, in the church ministry environment. And I have, Margaret, you've fully persuaded me there are things for leaders to embrace in lament that can be vital to what's next in our own leadership and in the church. So super grateful. In a minute, we'll kind of recap a little bit about what was covered in that first session, because others of you may not have been there for that. And then we'll move into the topic that is sort of the part two on lament and how critical it is for the enduring resilience and well-being of our souls as we move into leadership. One sort of technical thing right now before we get into that is we will be handling chat through Facebook. You can make some comments in there, and the team who supports us for this webinar will be feeding those to myself and Margaret so we can respond to those. Really invite your comments and involvement here. And if you would, if you think maybe some of your friends would be finding value in this topic, again, it's quite relevant right now. Welcome for you to just like this and share it to your feed as well, because we'd really love for as many leaders as possible to receive the gift that I know we're about to have through your input, Margaret. So would you mind walking us through some of the groundwork that was laid back in July, and then help us move into where we're headed next?
Right. So back in July, I talked about prayers of lament being a very specific type of outpouring to God, and that were 7 attributes of lament in prayers. And I just want to go over those really quickly. I'm going to come back to them, but they are prayers of transition. So it's letting go. They're prayers of loss and sorrow. So there's naming it. And then there's prayers of courage, admitting the limitations of our own knowledge, gifts, and the ways in which we function with God and in the world. They're prayers of understanding, which also include humility. They are communal. What is really important is that God does not want us to be alone. Obviously, we have the Holy Spirit within us, and He is with us, but prayers of lament are meant to be prayed with each other. So very important aspect to that. And then number 6, they start out often in the Psalms, you see despair. We're going to talk about a psalm of lament later that has this despairing aspect of it, but there's always hope. And one of the things when I teach leadership, I almost always start with the idea that a good leader is cranky and hopeful.
You told me that.
That
That is so great.
Because you want a leader who's cranky, because that leader believes that something needs to change. The leader recognizes a disequilibrium, but also is hopeful. So if you have a leader who's just cranky, they're just cranky. They're not problem solving. If you have a leader who's just hopeful, then they're not seeing the big picture. And so leadership is always about tension. And that's one of my favorite points of tension for a leader to understand, is that cranky and hopefulness. And that is what is in prayers of lament.
Can I ask a quick question on that? Those seven attributes that you found in common with the prayers of lament, which was a whole body of research you did, right, to study those. And I'm sorry if you mentioned this the first time, I missed it. Why were you looking at the Psalms at prayers of lament for a theme? What were you looking for?
Good, Minnie. One thing I want to end is.
Oh, sorry, did I cut you off?
And then you just pitched me a softball, and I'm looking forward to smacking it out there in some field. So lament, the last one, is that it's a posture of learning. We're asking God to move us away from a defensive rigidity, which often happens for leaders, and saying, Lord, I'm open to this new person that you want me to be.
Wow.
So
sorry, I didn't realize we had caught off before the 7th. Right. So all of those, can you restate all 7 of those again?
I can, and we're going to do that again. So it's letting go.
Yep.
2, naming it. 3, courage. I like to think of that as having a thick theology, to have courage to bring it to God. The 4th one is understanding and humility. 5th one is other oriented. 6th is hopeful and purpose oriented. 7 is a posture of learning.
Right.
We'll come back to that. So why did I get interested in this? Well, actually, this has been a 20-year interest for me. What I am interested. So I used to be a professor, taught leadership. I worked with 3 other professors. We had a program at Seattle Pacific University in industrial organizational psychology, where our emphasis was in leadership. And by the way, I'm a leader scholar. I will let others decide if I am a leader, but I know the leadership scholarship. So the other 3 people that I were working with, all experts in the area of leadership. What I chose was the downside of leadership, the dark side of leadership. What are the issues that leaders face? in a broken world. So while my other colleagues were yay, rah, rah, let's all be leaders, I was more like, I was interested in the research. I said, you know what? There's issues with power, with identity, when you are a leader. And so one of the things I started looking at 20 years ago were leaders who had some sort of falling. So it might be a moral failure. It might be a situation where they're just overwhelmed and just burnt out. It could be a culturally dislocating or an identity dislocating situation, like I don't recognize myself anymore,
Oh,
sort of
yeah, I've
thing.
been there. Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's nothing new that leaders have these kind of hit the wall situations. But what I was interested in was the leaders that hit those walls and then actually came back to be better leaders. So what was it that some leaders just fall off the radar and others come back and have this second career that is even more powerful than when they were, quote unquote, a successful leader? And in the midst of that, what you find is that there is this cognitive, because we say cognitive in psychology, but this reflective time of, I don't want to be who I am.
Wow.
There's something more here.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and in the research, I just want to say what is really powerful in the research, and this is that other oriented, is when people hit this block, as it were, there's someone who comes along and helps them idealize the next possible self. Fascinating.
That is.
Fascinating. That in a sense, oftentimes, I want to say the Lord sends someone, but we see this in church. There's people who come alongside, who walk us through these dark times. So what I've been interested in for a very long time is, how is it that these leaders make the pivot from and when I say successful, usually what we're looking at is people who have all the worldly accolades. They are recognized as leaders. And what happens in those situations is that leaders take on those accolades as their identity. In a sense, the Lord is no longer enough. The Lord is not sufficient because of these accolades. And when leaders tend to hit this wall, they recognize that those accolades mean nothing. And I'm talking about Christian leaders and people who have no necessary faith, but they understand that the external accolades are meaningless. And so in this time, in this time of disequilibrium, there is this crying out. And as Christians, it maps with Lamentations. How do I make sense in this swirl? And so I just I taught a class for a graduate program here at Wheaton about 2 weeks ago on crisis, leadership in crisis. And the first question I asked the students was, what's the difference between an emergency and a crisis? So this is their first day of graduate school. They're all adults.
And throw them in the deep end.
Like but I want to say, it's not that meant to be that compliment. I really want to hear what you think. There's a difference between an emergency and a crisis. There's no right answer here. But the way I want to think about the difference is, an emergency, let's say like last summer, I fell off my bike and broke my elbow. Yeah, I know, that was terrible.
Bummer.
Yeah, it was. I had to get to the doctor's office, right? It was urgent, it was an emergency. But when I got there, the doctor knew what to do. So when we have emergencies, we have to act quickly, but there's a procedure that we need to follow.
It's a known solution.
It's a known solution, even though it's time sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
In a crisis, there is still that urgency and time sensitivity, but there's a couple other things that add on to that.
Mm-hmm.
So in a crisis, there's a threat to the workings of the organization. Whereas in emergency, you know what to do. In an organization crisis, the organization, not only are you facing a crisis, but the organization itself is in a crisis. Now, bear with me all, folks. I am not a pastor. I get the joy of working with pastors, but I got to believe some of you are going right now, oh my gosh, that's us right now. Not only do we have this external threat, but we have this threat to our organization. The second aspect of crisis is lack of information. No one knows what's happening in the next months, weeks, years, who's open, who's not, how do we make decisions? And one of the things I want to say parenthetically to that is in a crisis, it's difficult to come up with right decisions because you're always working with lack of information. So what I like to tell leaders is you're trying to come up with good decisions, but you're not going to make right decisions. And it's really important for leaders and your teams to understand that you're all on the same plate with that, or because
That's a great distinction.
yeah, people are going to be pushing about, we need to make this decision and what's the right decision. And the fact is, you don't have enough information to make the right decision. And why that is important is because as you get more information, you need to be able to pivot. And so to not get locked into we made this decision, was this the right or wrong decision? If you make a different decision, it's not that you made a wrong decision. You're just making now with new information, you're making a better decision. So it's not right or wrong, it's good and better as we get more information. Third point for a crisis, there's some sort of social disruption. And when I say social disruption, that is not protesting on the streets, although that is a form of social disruption. But in an organization, what you see social disruption is the roles and responsibilities that people have are not quite working right now because you're having to act in a different way. And so people start stepping on each other's feet, as it were. And pastors, you're probably seeing this, like the roles and responsibilities are not clear. We just need to call that out. That's just part of a crisis. And then lastly, there's urgency, just like there is with an emergency, but there's also no end in sight. And that's what we're seeing right now. And so those are the main differences between a crisis and an emergency. So why did I just go down what seems like a rabbit hole? Well, the point being is that a crisis is dislocating. Things cannot be the same as they were. And a good way to think about a crisis in this sense is that the present is now the past. If that makes sense. When we think about what's the present, we tend to think of, a couple months. Usually in a regular year, we would say, oh, it's 2020. This is a present. But so many of us see about March 15th, right, is now the past. It's not present. Our window of what we consider the present is fairly small. It might just be a day, and everything else is in the past. So you see how that gets very dislocating, in that we don't have the large margin of the present that we usually have. And that just means that we're kicking in to a time where things are changing and we don't have control over them.
Yeah.
Well, going back to the issue of these leaders, that's exactly what they experienced. Although it wasn't because of a COVID virus, it was something because of work, but they all landed in this dislocating place. So in a sense, what church leaders are experiencing right now in this crisis mode is very similar to leaders who hit a wall in the research. It maps really well.
Wow. Wow. Hey, while you're about between breaths, I just want to say great reminders as Margaret is going through these points. You guys, if you're out on Facebook and you want to jump in with questions, please do enter into the chat, because there is some, I don't know if you're feeling it, but there's like some gold dropping here, and things that every one of us in church leadership and ministry probably have multiple points of identification with. And if you have a question or comment for Margaret, please do drop that in the chat. We'd love to hear from you, and I'll reseed once again, Margaret, and keep making those connections for us.
So let me go back to Lamentation. So what happens often with these derailing leaders is that they step away from their work. They very well could be fired, by the way, but I want to say get fired if there's a moral failing or whatever, but it's not unusual for people to step away. What I want to argue with Lamentations, prayers of lament, is that that's not necessary. God has given us a gift to seek deeper meaning and to get that internal God is enough, and to let go of the external accolades and still stay in our mission. One of the things that Eddie and some of the others who are involved, you are just saying right now, how pastors are just burnt out and want to step away, and it's just all too much. And I get that, it definitely is, but you can stay. You don't have to back out, as it were. You can stay in ministry, but I think it takes the time to come alongside the Psalm, the prophets, and do the work of lamenting while you're in your job. You don't have to step away, but you can move to a healthier place in the midst of all this. And so that's another important aspect of hitting the wall. So often we think of burnout, that the only outcome from burnout is to step away. It doesn't have to be, but there has to be a pivot to get you away from that burnout. And Lamentations gives us the opportunity to practice that pivot while in ministry. So I
just have this visual image in my mind, Margaret, as you're talking, of someone who is like moving forward in this crisis mode, and it's becoming too much, and I don't even know, I'm losing my ability to focus or concentrate. I've had days like that even this past week. It's like, what is going on? And if we're not careful, there's a cliff. We're going to fall off that cliff, and there will be something catastrophic. And I hear you like over on the side saying, actually, guys, that is a cliff. You don't want to go over it, but there's a little ditch. It requires going down. There's a little ditch, but on the other side of that ditch, we're going to call that Lamentations, or the gift of lament. If you're willing to voluntarily choose this descending into something hard and painful and real, there's something on the other side that is of high value. That's just this image I have. I was like, you're inviting us into a ditch instead of over a cliff.
You know what? That is perfect. That is exactly what I would want to say, is that it is the ditch instead of the cliff, because you can go over the cliff. And by the way, through God's grace, if you find yourself that you go over that cliff, God is there.
Always.
And it is
excellent point.
Always.
Always.
But
excellent.
the point being is, recognize this dip. And by the way, good metaphor, because in crisis management, what you see happens is you have like the honeymoon. Like, and I said this with Eddie, is in March and early April, everyone's working so hard. We're getting the churches online. Even though it's more of an emergency than a crisis in those early weeks with it. But now what happens with crisis management is you actually get a little bit of a high, because you're invested in mission, you're helping people, and then you just get this crash. And it's normal. It's absolutely normal to have that crash. So the idea of let's not go over the edge, but there's this trench or dip, maps really well with how we see the process of crisis management that is long term.
That does give me hope, and I hope it gives others hope to hear what we're experiencing is real and important to contend with in constructive ways, and that the dip, whatever we want to call it, might be one of the most constructive invitations to the future that we could receive. It's beautiful.
So I want to go back. I spent some time back in July talking about the definitions of kind of these 7 attributes of lament. And by the way, other people will have different organizing principles around lament. I do want to say one thing, however, before I go back through the 7, is I think when you talk to people about what does it mean to lament, there can feel like there's a passive withdrawal. That makes sense. Like I'm just going to lay it before the Lord because I'm on the ground. And that's the first part of lament. That is the letting go and naming it, but that's not all of lament. So I want people to think about prayers of lament is in terms of active in engagement. Because if you only stop at letting go and naming it, that's the cliff. You're going to go over. And so what we want to be able to do is say, lament, again, what we've been saying is lament will help you to stay on, not go all the way over. So it's really important that the mindset of what lament means is not just the negativity or the negative aspects, but in order to move forward with lament, you have to get to the point where you recognize loss.
That makes sense.
Lament starts with recognizing loss. So Mindy, one of the things when you and I talked earlier, you asked me, how do you start the process of lament? And it is naming it and letting go. And recognizing that there's limitations for what you can do right now. And this gets back to the idea of good, not true, or
not right.
Not right. Exactly. I don't know the right decisions. That's starting to let go, but you can still be making good decisions. And then with the courage and thick theology, one of the things I like to think about lament is I'm not sitting across how am I visualizing God? Am I visualizing God as someone who's sitting across the table from me and I'm negotiating with him? Am I seeing him as only a judge who's judging my failings, even though I know in my heart Jesus Christ came to redeem all of my sin? Do I view God as only judge or someone I'm negotiating with? And I think Lamentations creates a situation where I see God alongside me. My image is I love to think about God sitting with me on the couch and having his arm around me and saying, I've been there. I'm
Wow.
here for you. And so that's that courage, is to be brave enough to be honest with God and knowing that he's there with us. And
Mm-hmm.
so I like to think of this is a thick theology of understanding who God is. There was a wonderful book that came out. I'm so old, but J.B. Phillips, some people are going to remember that. God is small,
Yep,
right?
I
Little
remember it.
changed my life. In that when we have a vision of God that is too narrow and too aligned with human stereotypes, such
Mm-hmm.
as broker or judge,
Mm-hmm.
it's a small ball view of God.
Yeah,
So Lamentations increases, um, in a sense, it increases our view of God to someone who we don't understand.
beautiful.
We have to let go um, of the images that do not work.
Yeah. Margaret, while you're getting ready for your next point on here, I just want to let you know we did hear from Roy on Facebook, who is saying, how can we learn more? So thank you for making that comment and question, and others who want to add questions, please do. We will respond to them as we're able. But I just wanted to let you, Roy, know that we will have show notes, including diagrams for all of the things that we're talking about today. And Margaret, you may have another offer that or something else you want to suggest along those lines. But I think just so you know, already people are saying, how can I learn more?
Thank you all very much. I'm being very professorial. I have my notes like with bullets and all the things, but we can get some things
Yeah, we
to.
will.
So I'm trying to think of with that interruption where I want to go with it. The fourth thing about lament is understanding and humility, and that's the beginning of the process of making sense of who I am in this disequilibrium. So disequilibrium, the wonderful things you think it's shaking us, is how is it that I view myself? And is that a healthy way to view myself? So as a pastor, how am I interacting with my team? How am I interacting with my congregation? And do I like myself as I'm doing that?
Wow.
And that may sound very egotistical, but these leaders that I've been looking at for 20 years, they often get to a point where they say, I don't recognize myself. I don't like myself. I don't like how I'm functioning. And some of our leaders out there may find that in this time of disequilibrium, that there's a realization that I don't like who I am anymore. Maybe I'm short with my family. Maybe I'm short with my kids. Maybe I'm frustrated that I can't be all things to all people. Well, if right, because everyone is pushing on pastors right now, and everyone knows the solution that they want. And let's just say pastors as leaders are dealing with a lot of people who are not leaders right now. And of course, everyone is telling pastors that God has told them to tell the pastor, right? Which is not a very thick theology. So I get it. And so in this lamenting, there is this, how do I understand myself? Because I'm seeing things in myself. I think some of our friends have used the word crispy. Some people are feeling crispy right now. Well, that's a great opportunity to understand how am I functioning with God? How do I see myself as a leader, and how am I functioning with others? And so that's that aspect. Then the other oriented. Now, after I just badmouthed everyone's people that they're working with, but let's just call it, because we're naming it, there's still the point of being other oriented and being able to take other people's perspectives. So there's that aspect. And then the hopefulness that I talked about earlier, the what I want to say about hopefulness is also related to that, is being purpose oriented. So we all can pull out our copy of The Purpose Driven Life. It's not a bad idea to thumb through where you've made notes in your copy. I'm assuming with millions sold, people who are watching this have a copy somewhere. Good stuff. And to get back to that first love. And then the thing with Lament is we're doing it out of a posture of learning. So learning is always about transformation. When I was teaching, I like to talk about information, knowledge, and wisdom. And I would talk about information is the what, the cogs, right? Knowledge is structure of information. So it's the so what? Why do I care about something? And then wisdom is the now what? So what am I going to do about this? What am I going to do with this knowledge? How does it change me? How do I use it to change people around me? What is the action or response to knowledge? That's wisdom. So in Lamentations, that 7th point is a posture of learning. What is the now what? The whole point of doing Lamentations, of lament, is a telos. What is the end? What is it that I am hoping for? And here's the thing with lament and how you image God, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. That's the important thing. You not, because if you know what the outcome is going to be, then you've put God on the other side of the table and you're negotiating with him. The whole point of lament is to open yourself up to that posture of learning. So that's just a review of those 7 points. I want to say one more thing. And then Mindy, I'll stop talking.
No, this is great.
That in between our first session with Lament and now, I'm working on another project, and I've been looking into the psychological literature, the industrial organizational psychological literature on resilience. So how do people build resilience in organizations? And here's the fascinating thing is we have research literature that's about 20 years old on resilience that has been done in the military. And if you think about that, a pressure cooker, fog of war, always being faced with challenges, don't have the right answer. And what the research has been showing is kind of who survives and who kind of drops out. So who stays in the military and who stays as strong leaders. Here's the interesting thing as I looked at the resiliency literature. By the way, I just want to say one thing. In resilience, it is, here's the literally the textbook definition of resilience. It is the practice of adjusting and acclimating well during a challenging time filled with trauma and hardship. That definition is 14 years old. But I'm going to read it again and see how it links to what we're doing in this moment. It is the practice of adjusting and acclimating well during a challenging time filled with trauma and hardship. Couple important words there. Resilience, you're not born resilient. You and I talked about this a little bit. It seems like some people are more resilient than others. It's because of practice with attributes of resilience. And resilience is different than grit or hardiness, because resilience is always in reaction to a challenging time. So some of you may be familiar with Angela Duckworth's work on grit. Great stuff. Absolutely great stuff. But she's talking kind of in what we would say in psychology, homeostasis. It's a non-challenging time. Resilience is about reacting to a challenging time. So here's the thing. Here are the 6 aspects of resiliency, and they map on to lament. When I was looking at this, it literally, I use the word literally, I had goosebumps.
Mm-hmm.
So first attribute of resiliency. Again, these are practices, folks. You can practice resiliency. You're not born with it. This is part of what you can do now through lament to build resiliency. The first one is accepting limitations. For lament, that's letting go and naming it. The second attribute, and again, this is studies of thousands of military, mostly officers, belief in God or a higher power. That for us is that thick theology. It's that courage. The third aspect of resilience is making meaning in the disequilibrium. Excuse me. That is understanding and humility. The fourth attribute of Lamentations. The next attribute of resilience, taking the perspectives of others. For Lamentations, that's being other-oriented, emptying ourselves of ego and being other-oriented. Next, for resilience, an openness to learn something new. And for me, that is the hopeful and purpose-oriented. Then the final attribute of resilience is a willingness to be changed to what I would call a posture of learning. So the point being here is that by entering into lament, we are actually practicing resilience.
That's
Too
huge.
often, I think we think lament is just, I'm down on the ground and I've fallen over. I can't get up. I need to call out to the Lord. And yes, that is part of it. But lament is about building resilience. And again, getting to a better place in this dip, recognizing we're in this dip, but coming out in a better, stronger, self-oriented, internal, that I am, that God is enough for me, and letting go of the trappings of the external attributes. So that's what I wanted to say.
That is so powerful, Margaret. So powerful to hear you describe how this body of research that predated everything that we're dealing with right now had identified these practices of resilience that exactly mapped up to the research that you had done around what is in common in these prayers of lament. And if we really understood them, not as like the beginning is the, oh my gosh, I have to go be honest about what's really, really hard. That's the starting point. But that walks what you discovered in the biblical concept of lament really takes us all the way through those practices of resilience. That's like beautiful.
Yeah. It's a different way to think about lament.
Yeah. Much more positive, actually, right? Or constructive,
right.
maybe. Yeah.
Right. And honestly, what started this for me is it's a terrible thing. But back in 2014, when I was at Seattle Pacific University, we had a student who was shot on campus. We had an active student on campus, an active shooter. And that night, we gathered in the church across the street, and one of our Old Testament scholars said, we're just here to lament tonight. We don't have answers. And that was the first time I accepted Jesus Christ as my personal savior when I was 7 years old. I cannot remember another time where I have ever heard anyone in church talk about lament. I think that this is such a rich topic for pastors to lean into right now. We just don't talk about lament. And so that's why I think this conversation is so important.
So vital, so vital. Margaret, thank you so much for your thought leadership in this and for your such an endearing and personal way to invite us as church leaders to maybe, instead of headlong heading over a cliff that we don't know where it is or when it's coming, but instead turn and face the invitation to this very honest downward initial drop into what's hard and painful and confusing and out of control, but with the hope that we don't know where the other side is going to be. Like, I love that idea. We don't negotiate for what the outcome is. We have to truly enter into a yielded, surrendered process of allowing ourselves even to be transformed into whatever God is doing on the other side of that ditch. But we are not in control of that at all. And I love the words that you've put around that. I wonder if I think our team is going to be able to put up for us one of the laments that's available to us in the Psalms that we can use as a guide as we are thinking about lament and hopefully receiving this invitation that you have so graciously presented us with today. And I'm just going to read through this and then leave it actually quiet for, I don't know, just a few seconds, and probably read it a second time so that those of you who are listening, watching, you can shut your eyes if you want, not if you're driving or something dangerous, but like just let these words wash over you and see how they might be something you could incorporate into maybe your own times with God when it's hard to talk about the hard things. It's such a good thing to be thinking about God even on the couch with us in these times. So Psalm 90, portion of it reads, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it is dry and withered. We are consumed by your anger and terrified by your indignation. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sin in the light of your presence. All our days pass away under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. Our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. If only we knew the power of your anger. Your wrath is as great as the fear that is your due. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Relent, Lord, how long will it be? Have compassion on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love, that we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, for as many years as we have seen trouble. May your deeds be shown to your servants, your splendor to their children. May the favor of the Lord rest on us. Establish the work of our hands for us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. That's a beautiful invitation for us, isn't it?
Teach us to number our days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that we would gain a heart of wisdom. So, Margaret, thank you for joining us. deep breath is what I feel like in this moment. Friends, I hope that this has been something that allows you to have some maybe meaningful time in journaling or in prayer to process what you've heard. Again, there will be show notes to describe in detail the points that we've covered here. And we pray that this will be a blessing to you, that you will enter into lament greatly, willingly, intentionally, without knowing the outcomes, so that you will find that other side and the invitation that God has for you for transformation. So again, we just want to thank you for tuning in. Everything will be available. And if you want to see prior webinars or make sure you register for future, hop on over to resilientchurchleadership.com, and we'll look forward to seeing you at some point in the future. God bless. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mindy.
Thank you, Margaret. That was great.